I knew something was off the second I pulled into my driveway and saw a ladder leaning against my garage. My name's Reid Ellison. I'm a 39-year-old contractor, and I know my house like the back of my hand. So when I spotted a fresh trail of white footprints on my shingles and a faint chemical smell in the air, I knew someone had been up there recently. I walked around the side of the house, my boots crunching over gravel, and that's when I saw it. Right smack in the middle of my roof facing the street so every car driving by could see was a massive, bright blue logo. 3 blocky letters, HOA, with a little tree in the middle. The Willow Heights Association had stamped their branding on my roof like I was a damn billboard. I stood there, jaw clenched, fists tight. I hadn't approved this. No one had even asked. And I sure as hell didn't sign up to advertise for our HOA. Especially not under Helena Whitmore, the current president, a middle-aged control freak with a voice like a smoke alarm, and a vendetta against anyone who thought for themselves. I stormed inside, grabbed my phone, and called the HOA office. Willow Heights Association, this is Helena, came that shrill, grating voice. Helena, it's Reid Ellison. Why the hell is your logo painted on my roof? Oh, Reid, she said like she was talking to a misbehaving dog. We just finished our neighborhood branding initiative. It's part of the updated aesthetic cohesion plan. Didn't you read the newsletter? You mean that junk mail you stuff in my mailbox with the dog poop bag notices and passive-aggressive lawn warnings? I snapped. No, I didn't read it. Because I never agreed to have my home turned into a billboard. Well, she said, smug as ever, you're part of the community and as such there are certain obligations. You'll find it's already been approved by the board. Approved by who? Certainly not me, she paused. You're not on the board, Reid. Exactly, so maybe the board shouldn't be vandalizing private property. She laughed like I'd just told a knock-knock joke. Reid, it's not vandalism, it's community art. Hope your community art budget includes repainting my whole roof. Click. That was all I needed. I climbed up myself to inspect the damage. The cheap paint they used had already started to bubble under the sun, and it had seeped into the shingles. I'd have to replace the entire southern face of the roof to get it looking normal again. I wasn't about to eat the cost. So I did what I do best. I documented everything. Photos from every angle. Time stamped. I even pulled the footage from my security camera, which caught 2 HOA maintenance workers climbing onto the roof at dawn, buckets and brushes in hand, acting like they were tagging a warehouse wall. The next morning, I mailed them an invoice, $4,620, materials, labor, and disposal. I gave them 7 business days to pay it or face legal action. 3 days later, I got a letter in the mail from Helena. Your claim has been denied. The HOA is not responsible for improvements done in accordance with community guidelines. Any further harassment will result in fines. Fines. For repainting my own roof after they defaced it. That was the last straw. I took the letter and the invoice straight to my buddy Marcus, a property attorney who owed me a favor after I redid his porch last fall. He looked over the photos, the HOA bylaws, and Helena's dismissive letter, then nodded. They screwed up, he said. There's no clause in here that gives them the right to alter a homeowner's property without consent, especially not for branding. This is trespassing, destruction of private property. You've got a case. Good, I said. Because I'm done being pushed around. Marcus filed a small claims action that same week. Meanwhile, I made copies of the footage and printed out flyers with side-by-side photos. My roof before and after with the bold caption, "This could be your home next." Stop the overreach. I handed them out at the next HOA meeting. Helena was already seated at the front, her tight bun even more severe than usual. The board members sat beside her, bobbleheads in cardigans who nodded at everything she said. As soon as I walked in, the room went quiet. Reid, she said with that fake smile, I hope you're here to apologize for that inflammatory invoice you sent us. Nope, I said, handing her a copy of the flyer. I'm here to warn the neighbors. She flipped it over, her eyes narrowing. This is slanderous. No, I replied, it's evidence. I've got the security footage too, if anyone wants to see how your workers trespassed on my property and vandalized my roof. A few neighbors perked up at that. Helena stood, trying to keep her composure. This is not an appropriate forum for personal grievances. It's not personal, I said. It's about all of us. If they did it to me without asking, they can do it to anyone. There were murmurs now, people flipping through the flyers. One older woman in the back raised her hand. Helena, is this true? Did the board authorize painting people's homes? It was part of the beautification plan, she said, defensive now. We're creating a unified look for the community. It's in the best interest of all homeowners. Then why didn't we vote on it? Someone else asked. Helena's mouth opened, then closed. The board voted, that's how things work. Not when it comes to our private property, I shot back. And especially not when that board is just you and your friends rubber stamping whatever nonsense you dream up. The room was turning, I could feel it. The same neighbors who used to roll their eyes at my independence were now seeing just how far this little dictatorship had gone. I ended the meeting by telling everyone the court date. Told them they were welcome to come see how their dues were being spent on legal defense for trespassing and property damage. By the time I left, Helena's face was as red as a stop sign. And that was just the beginning. The day of the hearing arrived with the kind of tension that clings to your skin. It was early, and the courthouse lobby buzzed with quiet voices, rhythmic footsteps, and the occasional squeak of a bailiff's shoes on the tile. I sat beside Marcus in a navy button-up and clean jeans, arms folded, watching Helena parade and flanked by two of her board members, Donal, a retired insurance adjuster who once tried to fine a neighbor for hanging wind chimes, and Sharon, who wore a brooch shaped like a gavel and acted like it gave her legal authority. Helena wore a cream power suit and carried a leather folder like it was a shield. She didn't look at me, but her mouth twitched when she noticed the reporter from the local paper sitting 2 rows behind me. I hadn't invited the press. But someone, maybe one of the neighbors who saw the flyers, had tipped them off. I didn't mind. The more eyes, the better. Inside the courtroom, we were assigned a judge in his late 60s with a voice like gravel and the patience of a man who'd seen too many people lie before lunch. He asked for opening statements. Helena tried to leap in immediately. Your Honor, we believe this case is frivolous and a clear attempt to undermine community cohesion. Marcus didn't even look up from his notes. Your Honor, we have video evidence, photographs, documentation of trespass, property damage, and an invoice that was ignored. We're not here over lawn clippings. They painted a private home without consent with a commercial symbol. The judge exhaled slowly and leaned back. Let's see the footage. We played it on a laptop connected to the courtroom screen. Helena's workers climbing my roof at sunrise, brushing on that ugly blue paint like it was graffiti night at a summer camp. The judge watched without blinking. When it ended, he turned to Helena. Were these individuals acting on behalf of the HOA? Helena straightened. Yes, as part of a broader community improvement initiative, approved by our board. Did the homeowner give written permission? No, but he raised a hand. That's enough. I've heard what I need on that point. Helena's face stiffened. Donal shifted uncomfortably beside her. Sharon's brooch caught a beam of sunlight and glinted like it was mocking her. Marcus presented the costs. The removal, the replacement shingles, labor hours, and a modest fee for disposal. He included a line item showing that I'd offered to resolve it with reimbursement before filing anything, which the judge appreciated. I could tell because he nodded once, slowly. But then came the curveball. We'd like to submit this as well, Your Honor, Marcus said, sliding a folder across. It's a copy of the HOA's Articles of Operation, filed with the county clerk. You'll notice something unusual on page 4. The judge flipped through, eyes scanning fast. Then he stopped, his brows lifted an inch. Any visual alterations to a homeowner's property must be approved by the homeowner in writing prior to execution. He looked up. Is this document accurate? Helena didn't answer. Her mouth opened, then closed. Donal leaned toward her, whispering something urgent. Sharon blinked slowly, like she just remembered a dentist appointment. "Miss Whitmore." "Yes," she finally said, voice tight. "That's accurate." The judge closed the folder. "You violated your own charter." The room was silent except for the hum of the overhead lights. The judge leaned forward, resting his elbows on the bench. "I'm awarding the plaintiff full requested damages plus additional compensation for distress and time lost. $7,000 total. You have 30 days. Helena's knuckles turned white on her folder. I didn't look at her. I just nodded, thanked the judge, and walked out with Marcus. The reporter caught up with me on the courthouse steps, her notepad already filled. "Is this a one-off dispute, or do you think this says something bigger about how HOAs are run?" "It says everything," I said. "If they think they can stamp their logo on your roof, they probably feel entitled to a lot more. Today was about drawing the line." The article ran the next morning. Front page of the Metro section. Homeowner wins case against HOA over unauthorized roof branding. The photo showed me standing by my truck, arms crossed, with the courthouse behind me. I didn't smile. I didn't need to. The fallout came fast. Within a week, neighbors started pulling out old HOA newsletters and highlighting parts they'd never questioned before. A few of them knocked on my door asking to see the court documents. I showed them. Word spread, and then came the emails. One neighbor, a nurse named Linda, told me that last year Helena's board had demanded she remove the privacy lattice from her balcony because it interfered with visual uniformity. She'd complied reluctantly because she didn't want trouble, but now she wanted it back. Another, a retired Marine named Carlos, told me Helena once threatened to tow his daughter's car for being parked too long in his own driveway. He'd let it slide. He regretted that now. A quiet storm was building. I could feel it in the way people nodded at me during walks, or the way conversations grew quiet when Helena passed by. She tried to regain control the only way she knew how, through threats. The next newsletter was a masterpiece of pettiness. A full-page warning about hostile behavior toward board members. A new rule proposal limiting non-board communications to approved bulletin boards. And a reminder that unauthorized gatherings in the community garden were grounds for permanent space revocation. It backfired spectacularly. Someone still don't know who photocopied the newsletter and wrote, "Is this your HOA or a cult?" in red marker across the top. Copies showed up on mailboxes up and down the block. That's when people started organizing. Linda hosted a meeting in her backyard. 43 homeowners showed up. No board members were invited. We passed around a petition to call a community-wide vote on board leadership. The bylaws made it clear, if 1/3 of homeowners demanded it, a reassessment could be triggered. We got the signatures in 2 days. Helena tried to block it. She sent cease and desist letters to 3 of us, claiming the petition was illegally obtained. Marcus laughed when he read it. "She's grasping," he said. "She knows she's done." But then something else surfaced, something none of us expected. Carlos, the retired Marine, had a brother who worked at the county building department. He got curious after hearing about the court case and decided to check if the HOA had pulled permits for some of their so-called improvement projects, like the oversized signs they'd installed at both entrances of the neighborhood. Turns out they hadn't. Worse, the contractor who installed them, Helena's cousin, paid from the HOA's discretionary budget. No bids, no oversight. That was enough to trigger a formal complaint to the city's Office of Neighborhood Governance. They launched a preliminary audit. Then the police got involved, because the financial records revealed several purchases that didn't match any approved initiatives. A suspiciously large landscaping expense, a catering bill for a non-existent event, and a reimbursement check to Helena for consulting fees. The woman had been embezzling. The audit team showed up with badges. They seized the HOA's computers and froze the association's accounts pending investigation. Helena was escorted from the community office. Not arrested yet, but clearly no longer in charge. The neighborhood held its emergency vote 2 weeks later. Helena and her board were removed by a landslide. New leadership was elected people who actually listened, who promised transparency and followed through. Monthly meetings were moved to the community center and live-streamed. All budgets were published online. And most importantly, the bylaws were amended to require a homeowner vote before any structural or aesthetic change to private property. As for my roof, I had it redone with charcoal-colored shingles. No branding, no nonsense. And just to make a point, I had a small weather vane installed on top shaped like a crowbar. Marcus's idea. Symbol of resistance, he said with a grin. I never got an apology from Helena, but I did see her once more about a month later. She was packing up the last box from the HOA office, red-faced and silent as the new board president watched from the doorway. I didn't say anything. Just walked past with my coffee, nodded once, and kept going. The neighborhood was quiet again, peaceful, which was how it should have been all along. But I kept the invoice, framed it actually, hung it in my garage, a reminder that when you're up against people who think power gives them permission, all it takes is one well-documented pushback to bring the whole thing down. 2 weeks after Helena was escorted out of the HOA office and the new board took over, a quiet unease settled over Willow Heights. Not the kind that came from fear, more like that breathless pause after a thunderstorm, when everyone's still waiting to see what damage might be hiding behind the fallen branches. The audit team hadn't closed its investigation yet, and I'd begun to notice unmarked sedans parked near the community office at odd hours. At first I thought I was just being paranoid, but then Linda stopped by one evening after her shift. She didn't say anything at first, just handed me a thumb drive and said, "You might want to take a look at this." I plugged it in and opened the folder. Dozens of PDFs. Scans of bank statements, invoices, and internal communications between Helena and a man named Trevor Mathies listed as consultant, though I'd never heard of him before. "What is this?" I asked, scrolling through. "Trevor's not a consultant. He owns a property acquisition firm, small time. Mostly buys distressed properties through third-party buyers, flips them, or turns them into rental stock." "But look at this," she said, pointing at a document marked Phase 2 Expansion Proposal. There, in plain language, was a plan to rezone 3 vacant lots on the far end of the neighborhood into multi-unit executive townhomes. The twist: those lots weren't vacant. They belonged to elderly homeowners, 2 of whom had recently received notices from the HOA about unsanitary yard conditions and repeated non-compliance with architectural standards. They were trying to force them out, I said, the realization settling like a lead weight. Linda nodded. And Trevor's firm was going to offer relief by purchasing at reduced market value once the violations stacked up. They used the HOA as leverage. I leaned back in my chair. The roof logo, the fines, the unauthorized branding, those were just the surface. Underneath was a strategy to consolidate ownership, flip homes, and reshape the neighborhood into a higher profit zone. It wasn't just about control, it was about extraction. Linda handed me a second folder. "This one's worse. Look at the dates and the signatures." I did, and my stomach turned. A series of maintenance contracts, some signed off without board approval, showed payments totaling over $70,000 in under 4 months. The vendors listed didn't match any local companies. The addresses traced back to P.O. boxes or unrelated businesses. One of them had been registered only 3 weeks before receiving a $14,000 payment for structural assessments. They created dummy vendors, I said, or used real ones as fronts. Either way, it's fraud, and there's more. The final document was a wire transfer receipt. $42,000, moved from the HOA's emergency reserve account to an offshore holding company in the Cayman Islands. The name on the receiving account, Trevor Mathies. That was the moment I realized Helena hadn't just abused her authority, she'd weaponized it to gut the community financially and drive out vulnerable homeowners. And she hadn't acted alone. The next day, I forwarded everything to Marcus. He didn't call. He showed up on my porch 20 minutes later, tie undone, jaw clenched. "This is racketeering," he said. "At minimum, wire fraud, conspiracy to commit real estate fraud, and misappropriation of fiduciary funds. You don't just go to civil court with this, you go federal." That afternoon, Marcus contacted the local U.S. Attorney's Office through a colleague in the Financial Crimes Division. By sundown, subpoenas had been issued for bank records, and federal agents arrived in unmarked vehicles to seize hard drives from the HOA office. The new board cooperated fully. They'd only been in power for 16 days and had already begun auditing what Helena left behind. What they found was worse than they imagined. Over $120,000 had been siphoned from HOA accounts in less than a year. 22 homeowners had been fined under fabricated violations. 5 had sold their homes under duress, each below market value. And all of it was part of a coordinated scheme to repurpose the neighborhood for private profit. I was sitting in my truck outside the hardware store when I got the call from Carlos. "They arrested her," he said. "Where?" "Airport. She had a ticket to Montreal." One way. Later, I watched the footage on the evening news. Helena, in oversized sunglasses and a trench coat like she was in some low-budget spy thriller, being led away in cuffs. They'd also picked up Trevor Matthijs at his office downtown. The charges included interstate wire fraud, conspiracy, elder abuse, and violations of the RICO Act. I should have felt vindicated, but I just felt cold. That night, I walked past the homes of the neighbors who'd been targeted. Mr. and Mrs. Dellinger's house had a "for sale" sign out front. I knew they hadn't wanted to leave. They'd lived here 35 years, laughed on their porch every Sunday afternoon. They'd been fined 9 times in 6 months for lawn inconsistencies. Helena had broken them down methodically, but not all stories ended like theirs. Linda, Carlos, and I formed a committee under the new board, one tasked with restitution and community rebuilding. We called it the Homeowner Restoration Initiative. The goal wasn't just to fix what was broken. It was to re-establish trust, and that meant more than new bylaws. We created a legal assistance fund for anyone who'd been fined under fraudulent pretenses. Marcus volunteered pro bono. The board voted to suspend HOA dues for 3 months, while emergency measures were put in place to rebuild reserve funds transparently. We even held a neighborhood-wide vote to disband discretionary spending entirely now. Every dollar had to be approved in open meetings. But the biggest change came from the people. One Saturday morning, a group of teenagers helped repaint Mr. Dellinger's fence. Not because they were told to, but because he'd once fixed their bikes when they were kids. A few weeks later, a potluck sprang up at the community park, organized by neighbors who used to avoid each other out of fear of being reported for trivial issues. Now they shared recipes, laughed over folding tables, and swapped stories about when Willow Heights used to feel like home. It was slow. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. At the annual HOA meeting, now held outdoors under a string of borrowed lights, Linda stood up and spoke about the importance of vigilance. Not just against corruption, but against apathy. She said, "Power doesn't start with abuse. It starts when we stop paying attention." People clapped. Not the polite kind, but the kind that meant something. Carlos followed her with a proposal to create a rotating oversight council, a group of 5 volunteers who'd serve 6-month terms and report directly to the homeowners, not the board. It passed unanimously. As for me, I kept my role unofficial. I wasn't interested in politics. But I did install 2 new security cameras, one facing my driveway, the other angled toward the street. Not because I was expecting trouble, but because history has a funny way of repeating itself when no one's watching. A few months later, I got a letter from the Department of Justice confirming that Helena had accepted a plea deal. She'd agreed to cooperate in the broader investigation into Matthijs's network, which spanned multiple HOA-run neighborhoods. She'd face prison time, restitution, and a permanent ban from holding fiduciary roles in any community organization. I folded the letter and placed it in the same file as the framed invoice, a reminder, not just of what she did but what we stopped. Because in the end, it wasn't just about a logo on a roof. It was about how easily power can be abused when no one pushes back, and how sometimes all it takes to stop it is one person saying, "No, not here." The summer after Helena's conviction rolled in like a tide no one quite trusted. Everything had changed, but no one wanted to admit how much. Willow Heights was quieter these days. Not the suffocating quiet of residents watching their every move, but a cautious, rebuilding kind, the kind where people left their porch lights on just a little longer, as if trying to remind the neighborhood what warmth felt like. I was back to regular work by then. Roof jobs, patio repairs, kitchen remodels. It felt good to get my hands dirty again, to wear the ache in my shoulders like a badge of normalcy. But I kept my evenings free. That's when the real work happened. A week after Helena's sentencing, I got a call from a man named Wyatt Harlow. Claimed he was a federal investigator working with a task force on community organization fraud. Apparently, the Matthijs operation had ties to at least 6 other HOAs across the state. What started in Willow Heights was just one spoke in a wheel that had been turning quietly for years. Wyatt wasn't theatrical, no suits or sunglasses, just a sharp mind, a low voice, and a memory like a filing cabinet. He wanted to know everything. Not just what Helena had done, but how, who she intimidated, who she silenced, who might have helped her without realizing it. I told him about the rushed approvals, the maintenance crews that never showed up again, the invoices that never matched the work. He didn't take notes, he just listened. Then he asked if I still had access to the HOA's backup server. I did. Linda had turned it over to the new board, but they hadn't touched it yet. It was a clunky off-site system Helena had used as her private archive. I still had the login. Marcus and I had cracked it open once before just to confirm the invoice trail, but we hadn't gone deeper. That night I did. Buried in a folder labeled Archive Old was a spreadsheet with nothing in the title but a date, 4 years ago, nearly to the day. The document listed resident names, property values, and a column labeled Conversion Potential with rankings from 1 to 5. Every 5 was marked with a green tag that read, Accelerate. I recognized every name on that list. Some were still in the neighborhood, many weren't. I called Wyatt first thing the next morning. He showed up with a portable scanner and a warrant signed by a federal judge. Within 2 hours, the entire backup drive was in government hands. A few days later, Linda caught me outside my workshop. Her face was pale in the midday heat. "They found something else," she said. "Wyatt just called. He asked if I remembered a woman named Evelyn Marsh." I did. She'd lived 3 blocks over in a corner unit with a koi pond she maintained like a shrine. She used to wave from her porch every morning, always in a yellow sweater, even in July. Then one day the pond was gone. So was she. Linda swallowed hard. She didn't move. She died, fell down her stairs. But it turns out the HOA had sent a contractor to her house that morning for a foundation inspection. I didn't like where this was going. They pulled permits from the city, no record of work ever being scheduled, and the company listed another shell. My chest tightened. You think they pushed her out? I think they scared her, rushed her, maybe even caused it. Wyatt thinks it's negligent homicide, maybe worse. The story was no longer about fines or trespassing. It had become something darker, something calculated, and something far beyond our neighborhood. 2 weeks later, Wyatt returned with a small team from the Department of Justice. They weren't there to collect evidence this time. They were there to bring people in. 3 former board members were arrested that afternoon, Donal, Sharon, and a man named Curtis Langley, who had quietly resigned from his position on the board 6 months before the scandal broke. Turns out, Curtis had been the point of contact between Matthijs and the HOA during its earliest stages. He'd brokered the deals, funneled the payments, and even rewritten parts of the bylaws without authorization. All of it had been hidden in the metadata of the digital files. The charges were severe: conspiracy, wire fraud, racketeering, and in Evelyn Marsh's case, involuntary manslaughter by way of willful negligence. The DOJ didn't come halfway. They were building something big, something systemic. I testified twice over the next month. Once for the grand jury, once in preliminary hearings. I brought every document, every photo, every time-stamped screenshot. Marcus handled the legal framing. I just told the truth. By fall, the federal case expanded to include 3 other neighborhoods. One of them was 3 towns over. Another was in a gated community with a waiting list and a golf course. Apparently, corruption didn't care about square footage, but here's the part that stuck with me. During one of the hearings, the prosecutor presented a memo Helena had written to Matthijs shortly after the first test run of roof branding. It was cold, clinical, and disturbing. Property identity markers increase visual compliance and reduce resistance. Residents become less likely to question authority when their physical space is marked as part of a larger structure. It reduces the sense of personal ownership and increases behavioral conformity. I sat there, jaw clenched, while they read that into the record, not because I was surprised, but because I'd lived under that strategy and hadn't seen the full extent of it. They weren't just branding homes. They were training us to surrender. The final sentencing came in late November. Helena received 9 years in federal prison. Trevor Matthijs got 14. Curtis, Donal, and Sharon each received between 4 and 6, with additional restitution to be paid to the families affected, especially Evelyn Marsh's. There was no applause in the courtroom, just a long, collective exhale. After that, something shifted in Willow Heights. Not overnight, not dramatically, but steadily. The new board dissolved the old HOA entirely. In its place, a voluntary neighborhood council was formed. No dues, no enforcement powers, just a group of rotating residents who coordinated maintenance, organized community events, and acted as liaisons to the city. The council had no president, just a chair that changed every quarter. No one wanted power anymore. They wanted balance. Linda eventually ran for city council and won. Turned out, all those years of dealing with HOA politics had prepared her for real government. She focused on housing rights, zoning transparency, and homeowner protections. She even got a bill passed requiring non-profit HOAs to undergo biennial audits if they managed more than 20 homes. I rebuilt Evelyn Marsh's koi pond at no cost. Her niece had moved into the home after the case was finally closed. Quiet woman. Kept to herself, but always left a lantern on the porch. The day I finished the pond, she brought me lemonade and nodded toward the water. She'd like this, she said. She never liked being told what to do with her space. I didn't say anything. Just sat there, watching the fish swim in lazy circles. The framed invoice still hung in my garage. But now beside it was something else. A photo of our street during the community lantern walk. No logos, no branding. Just neighbors, candles, and a long stretch of pavement that finally felt like it belonged to the people who lived on it. I didn't need a badge or a title. I just needed to know that when the next Helena tried to carve up a neighborhood for profit, there'd be someone willing to dig in and say, not this time. Because once you've seen behind the curtain, you don't go back to silence, you get louder, smarter, stronger. And you make damn sure the roof over your head stays yours.